I'm Steve Redburn, and I'm interviewing Bill Hoagland, a veteran of the federal budget process. What's your earliest memory of the federal budget process? Was it during that period of time?
Probably the earliest memories was there as a junior economist at the Department of Agriculture, and remembering having a discussion with one of the budget officers in the agency and learning the difference between budget authority and outlays. And that was my first record. I remember, oh boy, this is, and I remember the lady explaining to me almost like, you dummy, don't you understand? But that was probably my first minor encounter with the federal budget.
Something a lot of people don't understand. Particular events over that period of time that you think were particularly important in shaping the federal budget process?
Because there was this failure on the 85 Dole Domenici Social Security. It was a rough time for my boss at that time, Senator Domenici, so mad at the process. And lo and behold, out of the blue comes this younger, dynamic senator from Texas, Bill Graham. And he comes, and he's not even on the budget committee. And he comes and he says, I've got an idea. I'm not going to vote for increasing the statutory debt limit beyond $2 trillion unless we get some process put together. And that then became the basis for discussions that led to, in 1980, late 85, 86, the Graham-Redmond-Hollings
process to control the deficit.
Yep. With fixed deficit targets, path to get to it. And that, to me, I've always been back on the broader scheme of the budget process and the legislation. I've always thought that the Budget Act itself was agnostic as it relates to fiscal policy in some ways. It never really said run a surplus, run a deficit.
Sure.
It simply was, and Muskie would have argued, which is kind of the boring part of it, it was an accounting tool. It was a way to say, you guys want to run surpluses or you want to run deficits? Fine, but we'll know what we're doing.
Right.
And we're going to have, but we're not going to force you one way or the other. It's the political will determine what's in a budget resolution that guides the future. I think Graham-Redmond-Hollings fundamentally changed that scenario by moving to a very specific outcome to be achieved of deficit reduction.
Right.
And that changed the process and made it more politically charged and difficult.
More partisan.
And partisan. In 1990 also with Dick Darman became, of course, the infamous Read My Lips budget summitry out at Andrews Air Force Base. In 1993 was a big year as far as I'm concerned. Republicans had lost control, both the Senate, House, and the White House, and that's when to Bill Clinton, to his credit, in some ways, while he wanted to do health care reform, quickly pivoted to the first thing we're going to do is control the deficit, and that was one of the major that legislation that passed.
His economic plan.
And it was done through reconciliation.
What are your thoughts on the recent process, if I could call it a process?
The process that we envisioned in 1974 is no longer functioning and needs some fundamental rethinking. At the same time, in the years that I've been associated with the process, it's become much more political, it seems to me, much more or less willing to, it's not a four-letter word, compromise when you have differences. And when that's overlaid with a process that's supposed to force compromise and force negotiations, it doesn't work. You can have the most beautiful process alive, but if people are not willing to compromise on their ideological positions, then I think, after all, as I always used to say, and I still do, that governing is budgeting, and budgeting is governing. That's what it's deciding on resources allocation, and if that fundamental aspect of governance is not achievable, then no wonder we have these budgetary crises that keep coming up. I still am an optimist at heart. I still think in the long term people of goodwill will find solutions and reach compromise. Unfortunately, it seems like it's becoming less and less visible to me.
Playing devil's advocate, we have got something in the way of deficit reduction through these negotiations, as painful as they are to confront. And we got the tax increase on the wealthy in January. We got the sequester cuts, ugly, but effective.
There has been some outcome from the crisis. I think the part that's beginning to bother me more than anything else is the areas of where the sequester, as an example, where the deficit reduction is coming from is not the area that's creating the problem. And I would love to see us go back and modify, if we're going to maintain sequesters, to modify it, to expand it, to include, and be honest with you, the means-tested programs, and Medicare and Medicaid, and even Social Security. I mean, take on the third rails, because
done it before.
And also add to the sequester tax expenditure.
Any final lessons that you draw from your career in this county?
Pendulum swings. Things go back and forth. We're, for the budget process itself right now, I think we're at a pretty low point in the swing. And but I am hopeful that it will swing back. I think that the process itself has been a victim of a bigger breakdown of collegiality not only in the Congress, but quite frankly in the country. We're a very divided country over many issues. And so I would say that just because the process is not working, you should not necessarily blame it on the Congressional Budget Payment Control Act, but look broader than that. And so I want to remain. That's why we'll continue to work to try to make it, see if we can make it work better. But until the whole system out there starts to recognize that that, as I say, that compromise is not a dirty word, I'm not going to hold my breath that things are going to improve in this area.